Verhelak Sol. I am Skegi Vetter, and welcome to the Norse Code. Today, we're going to cover yet another winter deity, Ullr. Now, Ullr is the Norse god of winter, archery, hunting, skating, and skiing. Sounds an awful lot like Skadi. He is the son of Sif. Now, Sif is the wife of Thor. However, Thor is only the stepson of Ullr. And Ullr is possibly the husband of Skadi. As we mentioned in the last episode, there are some sources that claim that Skadi and Ullr were wed. And then there's one vague poem somewhere that hints that Skadi married Odin, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So I tend to go with the Skadi and Ullr getting married, especially considering the issues that she had with her first husband, Njord. And Ullr is very, very similar to Skadi, as you'll find tonight. Ullr resides in Ullr. That's a tough one to pronounce. Ullr, maybe? Anyway, it means Udales. He lives in a Yule forest up on a mountain in the ice and snow. He is said to be a very handsome, just person and a very great warrior. And even Ullr's name means glory and splendor. He's a very well-revered god, held up on quite a pedestal. Which leads us to Ullr. Is he equal to Odin? Before we get into that, one quick disclaimer. I don't have any stories about Ullr for this episode, because there are none. Ullr, we know existed. We know Ullr was a very prominent god, but none of his stories have survived. He's mentioned in a couple stories here or there, and we'll get into that very, very shortly, but there's no actual stories of him. So with that, this might be a shorter episode. Anyway, back to Ullr being equal to Odin. As I said, very little has survived about Ullr in the stories. However, it is clear he was a major god. Very, very possibly right in line, maybe above or slightly below Odin himself. In the Grimnismal, there is a story of Odin being trapped. And we'll cover that in a future episode. But during his entrapment, he swears the blessings of, quote, Ullr and the other gods to whoever saves him. Why would he phrase it that way? Ullr and the other gods. Singling out Ullr doesn't single out any of the others. That makes you think that Ullr may be a very important god. And then in the Atlakvitha, there is a scene in which oaths are being sworn. The final and most solemn of the oaths is sworn unto the arm ring of Ullr. Because of that story in and of itself, we know that Ullr was very highly regarded for oaths. If you make an oath to Ullr, you really need to follow through with it. There's several stories throughout the Eddas of Odin being absent from Asgard. In one such story, he's absent for about 10 years. And during that time, Ullr ruled in his place. Now, there's some discussion as to whether when Odin came back, he had to chase out the usurper, or if he came back and was thankful to Ullr for keeping Asgard under rule while he was away. There's even a few that I've heard say that they think that the rule of Asgard may have been cyclical, meaning that for the warmer half of the year, Odin would rule. And during the colder half of the year, Ullr would rule. That's a little bit of speculation. I was not able to find that in any of the sources, but I did see it mentioned many places as I was doing my research for this episode. And something like this is not unprecedented. If you look at Celtic mythology, you have Brigid, who would, be a prominent goddess during the warmer half of the year from Beltane to Samhain. But from Samhain to Beltane, the colder half of the year, it was instead Kalik that would be the more prominent goddess. So, was Ullr Aesir, Vanir, or something else entirely? Well, he's often listed among the Aesir. He did reside within Asgard. But I believe he's more akin to the Vanir. And it's a little bit questionable whether or not he is or not. The same with the last episode when I said Skadi was Vanir. He is an ancient god. And the Vanir are considered to be an older race of gods than the Aesir. So, being that Ullr is a more ancient god than the Aesir, that puts him more in line with the Vanir, or possibly even older than the Vanir. He is the god of archery and hunting, which typically, in other pantheons, the archery, the hunting god or goddess is more of a nature goddess, and the Vanir are the nature gods. And then back in I believe it was our very first episode, maybe the second, I told you a little story about a time that I had the opportunity to speak with Freyr. During that discussion, I had recently been thinking about whether or not Skadi and Ullr were Aesir or Vanir, so I asked Freyr, is Ullr Vanir? And all he did was smirk. He didn't say no, he didn't confirm it, but he kind of gave that knowing grin of, yes, I can't tell you yes, but yes. So to me, that was a confirmation that Ullr is in fact Vanir. However, with the research that I've been doing for this particular episode, it is entirely possible that Ullr may be something far older than even the Vanir. Which kind of brings us to Ullr worship. Ullr was a very, very important deity for the Scandinavians, even with very little of his stories surviving. There are very many places in Scandinavia that refer to Ullr in their name, much like Skadi. These places are primarily in central Sweden and southern Norway, and almost nowhere in Denmark. Some of these places include the Ullevål, Ullevi, Ullared, Ullensaker, and Ullensvang. These are all towns and cities in Sweden and Norway. And as I mentioned a few times already, it is possible that the Ullr worship predates the worship of the Aesir, possibly even the Vanir as well. During the Viking Age, Ullr was already considered to be an ancient god. And given that the Scandinavians did not have writing, I mean, they had the runes and they would have the rune stones and that, but they didn't have books, scrolls, or anything that they could write their stories down on. It wasn't until well after the Viking Age that we had Christians who sat down and wrote the prose Edda, the poetic Edda, and the other sources that we have. So it's not surprising that all of these Ullr stories vanished. But it's very possible, probable even, that Ullr as a Germanic god existed for hundreds, thousands of years before the Viking Age, which would predate even the Vanir and the Aesir. I mean, looking at it from a chronological perspective, you have the ancient Germanic gods, and then as time progresses, you get the Vanir, which were primarily in Germany and Northern Europe, but not quite in Scandinavia yet. In Scandinavia, the Aesir, you get the Aesir, and then you get more movement of people from Germany to Scandinavia, bringing the Vanir with them, and that's where scholars tend to think that the Aesir-Vanir war came from, was these people fighting over who their gods were and who the correct gods were, and eventually they just kind of all merged together into just two different races, but within the same mythology. It's also one of the reasons that some people think that Frigg and Freya are the same goddess. That is a discussion for another episode, and probably a lengthy episode. Getting back to Ullr. So we have Ullr, who is obviously a very important god to the Scandinavians. He is an ancient god. Even during the Viking age, that he was an ancient god who may very well possibly be at that same level as Odin, or at least close to that level, a little below, a little above. You know, he is a major god who is very heavily worshipped in ancient Scandinavia, and we know practically nothing about him, which is unfortunate because he kind of fascinates me. I mean, y'all know my love for Skadi from the last episode. Well, Ullr is just the male counterpart of Skadi. Now, in modern times, Ullr is still worshipped, but not very widely, probably because of the lack of stories. Much like Skadi, he is easiest to work with in the cold, the snow, the winter months. To honor Ullr, you can spend time in the woods, the mountains, out in the snow, skiing, snowshoeing, partake in archery, especially with a yew bow. Yew is a wood that's very widely used for bows during the Middle Ages. It is a very strong, straight-grained wood with a lot of springiness, which makes it practically a perfect wood to build bows. Now, I have my bow, well, one of my bows back here. It's not yew. Actually looks to be oak from the looks of it. I would like to get a yew bow in a Viking style someday. Also, for Ullr worship, you know, you can, if you're going to swear any oaths on a ring, an arm ring or anything, do so invoking Ullr. Ullr was often used for swearing oaths. A lot of times people would swear their oath on a ring and then bury that ring outside of a Ullr temple. So swearing an oath to Ullr is very, very important. Like that's an oath you have to keep, and Ullr will help you keep that oath. I mean, oaths are very important to the ancient Scandinavians. You know, the Norse people viewed oaths very, very highly. If you swore an oath, especially onto a ring, you were expected to hold up to that. I mean, that's the equivalent of a modern day contract. Very legally binding. And to do one while invoking Ullr is even more so. So that's really all I have on Ullr. A fascinating god with very little information attached to him. Now, I would love to do a update to this video if and when more information is gleaned from Ullr. I know personally I plan on doing some meditations and such to try to connect with the gods and glean more information on Ullr. And if I am successful in doing so, I will certainly update all of you on what I have learned. But that's really all I got. Now, I do want to make one quick announcement. If you are going to be or live in the southern Pennsylvania region, and on February 19th in Gettysburg at the metaphysical store Nature's Touch, I will be teaching a class on Skadi and Ullr. It's the first in what we hope will be a series of classes introducing people to the Norse gods. And I thought, it's the middle of winter, what better than to do Skadi and Ullr, who I have just covered on this show. So if you're interested, please go to Nature's Touch, their Facebook page, and that's the Nature's Touch in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And they'll have all the information there on how to get registered. Or you can go to the Norse Codes Facebook page. If you scroll down a little bit, I've posted a couple advertisements, and I will be posting more as well. So check that out. And that's it for tonight. So make sure you do your social media ritual. Leave a like, a comment, subscribe. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. So thank you for joining me today. I'll see you the next time.